Welcome back. This is week 4 of the online class, Transmission of the Light, our exploration of Keizan Zenji's Denkoroku. I'm Ayadama Deepa, also known as Konin, and I want to share about the chapter on Dongshan. Dongshan is actually the Zen ancestor after whom the Soto school is named. So he's the To part of Soto. So in Chinese, it's Caodong, C-A-O-D-O-N-G, Caodong. And Dong is this, Dongshan. Shan means mountain. And his student was Chao Shan. So Chao Dong. This was the school of Dongshan, and the Japanese then changed or smoothed that to Soto. So he's known as Tozan in Japanese. So in this chapter, from the Denkoroku, looking at the Cook translation here, we have, who can hear the non-sentient preach the Dhamma? This is Dongshan's question to Yunyan. And Yunyan said, the non-sentient can hear the non-sentient preach the Dhamma. But then Dongshan said, well, do you hear it? And Yunyan said, if I could hear it, you would not be able to hear me teach the Dharma. And then Dongshan replies, in that case, Langzhe, that's him, Langzhe does not hear you teach the Dharma. Yunyan said, if you don't hear me teach the Dharma, how much less can you hear the non-sentient teach the Dharma? And then Dongshan awakened to this point, and he spoke in a verse. So now it's very clear, they pause right there and say, he awakened to this point, meaning not fully awakened actually, but he had a very key insight right here. Wonderful, wonderful. The preaching of the Dharma by the non-sentient is inconceivable. Now that's a hint. If you try to hear with your ears, it's hard to understand. If you try to hear it in a conventional way, in other words. But when you listen with your mind's eye, very nice turn of the words there by Cook. If you listen with your mind's eye, then you know it. And so let's see the Cleary translation of that same poem. So the Cleary translation is, wondrous, wondrous, the teaching of the inanimate, or the non-sentient, is inconceivable, yes. If you listen with your ears, you won't understand. But when you hear the sound with your eyes, then you'll know. It's a little more difficult to understand that way, the meaning of this verse. So looking again at the Cook translation, so what's happening here? So Dongshan is asking about the insentient, and oftentimes the insentient is understood to mean like rocks and trees and clothes, anything physical, a table, a statue of a Buddha. But that's not what the insentient means. The insentient means that which is beyond this personal consciousness. So it's referring actually to Nibbana. So that's why he gets it. And this verse is so beautiful. The preaching of the Dharma or the teaching of the Dharma by the non-sentient is inconceivable. Exactly. It is literally beyond conception. So that's why if you try to hear it with your ears, it's hard to understand, because that's all, you could say, conditioned phenomena. That's all coming through our consciousness. That's all being conceived of, perceived in a particular way, cognized in a particular way. Especially the verbal. This is again touching back into verbal words as incapable of truly capturing the truth of Buddha nature, because they are by definition limiting. But when you listen with your mind's eye, yes, then you know it. When you listen with that which drops off all conception, then you will know it. And again, that sounds like a bit of a paradox, but the example that I want to bring forth for you that might help to put that in some context, especially those of you who have experience practicing with early Buddhism, is Venerable Sariputta. So Sariputta, when he was teaching, he said nirvana, as it's known in Pali, or nirvana in Sanskrit, nirvana is bliss, nirvana is bliss. And one of the students said, Venerable, how can nirvana be bliss if there is no contact, no sense experience, no cognitive experience when one experiences nirvana? And he says, it is precisely because there is none of that, that nirvana is bliss. So we have that capacity because we live in the midst of that. Going back to what I said in the earliest of classes of this class, that which is inconceivable or non-conceptual or unconditioned, it doesn't have a place, a particular place or a particular time, or even a particular set of conditions associated with it. And for that reason, it must be accessible at any moment. We live right in the midst of it. We live right in the midst of it. Great, so Dongshan. Dongshan, another example of someone who had quite a lot of difficulty coming to realization. But his story is very encouraging for that reason, I believe. At least I find it very encouraging. So when he was a young man, he heard the Heart Sutra, part of the Heart Sutra being recited. And it says in the Heart Sutra, and I gave you, for those of you who are new, and maybe even for those of you who've heard it a million times, I gave you a link to the Heart Sutra as it's translated by San Francisco Zen Center. And the Heart Sutra is the shortest, pithiest of the collection of teachings called the Prajna Paramita, the perfection of wisdom, or the wisdom beyond wisdom teachings. And this is the Hridaya Sutta. So the Hridaya Sutta means heart, the literal organ, but it's not actually referring to that. It's actually heart in the sense of the kernel the core of the thing, the heart of it, the heart of the matter. And there's this line, no eye, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. And Dongshan heard that and he said, wait a minute, I have an eye, I have ears, I have nose, I have tongue, I have body, I have mind. What is this teaching all about? And so his teacher, this person who was reciting this, was impressed with him. Why? Because he didn't just swallow the teaching whole. He was deeply trying to understand and to relate it to his own experience. And so for that reason, he was sent to a Zen teacher and went forth and took up the precepts. He left his mother and other siblings in order to do that. And he said, I will not return to my native place and pay respects or bow to my mother before I acquire the Dharma. And that actually is, as the Sotoshu reminds us, I believe it's a Sotoshu footnote, that reminds us that that was actually a teaching within Chan monastic order, one of the guidelines, lifestyle guidelines, you could say, of the Chan monastic order, is that one should not pay respects to one's parents once they've gone forth. And eventually, she unfortunately suffered quite a bit because of this. She became homeless. She wanted to go and visit Dongshan, but he kept her away. He kept her from meeting with him. And it said that she died of grief outside his room. But actually that contrasts with the dream that he had later, in which she says, by firmly maintaining your resolve and not meeting me, I severed the attachments of love, and as a result am born in the realm of the satisfied celestials. That's the Tusita heaven. That's where the Maitreya Buddha and the future Buddhas wait for their turn in the Tusita heaven. Nonetheless, this is, in my view, a very sad story, and not something to be emulated. When we go forth, whether in our hearts or in our actual lives, we establish a different kind of relationship to our families. We establish a much greater degree of independence from our families and from all of our relationships. And yet, that doesn't imply that we need to lose our compassion. It doesn't mean that we cease to be a presence or good in the world, or in those relationships, or in our family structure. And so I wouldn't recommend this style of practice. So Kizan goes on to tell a little bit more about Dongshan. When he was a very young monk, Nanquan asked this question about Mazu's death. Tomorrow we're going to provide offerings to Mazu who had died at his funeral, in other words. But do you think he will come? And all the monks were silent except Dongshan, who stepped forward and said, if he has a companion, he will come. And so Nanquan says, Nansen, as he's known in Japanese, says he was a very, very quirky and also quite cutting master. He said, though he's young, he's extremely suitable for polishing, meaning, well, you have guts, kid, but you didn't quite get there. Nonetheless, Dongshan says, don't turn a good thing into something shameful. In other words, don't cut me down because I showed some courage. So that's how Dongshan was. That's a very telling story about his approach to the Dhamma, that he had a lot of courage to just keep coming forward, keep trying to relate this to his experience. So in any event, then we see that he has this question about the non-sentient, and we see this dialogue going on and on again. And so let's go into a little bit more of the detail of the non-sentient. So if I don't want to go into the national teacher version, I want to stay with his version, Dongshan's version with Yunnan. So going back to the beginning of the case. So the non-sentient preach the Dhamma means that Buddha nature is demonstrating reality, or demonstrating Dhamma, meaning what? Meaning the laws of truth, the reality of all things, the true nature of things, right? Dhamma as, yes, as both the real, what's true, what's real, what's actual about the world, and the teachings that point to that. So the non-sentient can hear the non-sentient preach the Dhamma, right? So those who have gone beyond the conceivable can experience the inconceivable. Okay, makes sense, right? Do you hear it? So Dongshan's asking Yunnan a checking question, as in, are you awakened? Have you had this experience yourself? Or are you just flapping your lips? Yunnan says, if I could hear it, you would not be able to hear me preach the Dharma. So Yunnan stays on the subjective side of the realm and says, if I, this personal human being, could hear the inconceivable, then you wouldn't be able to hear me preach, meaning I'd be dead already, right? Because to experience, to realize the inconceivable is to go beyond this state of conditioned body and mind. While still alive, or Mahaparinibbana, after death. Okay? Both things are possible and have been described. But if I could hear it, Yunnan meaning if this subjective version of me could be experiencing the inconceivable now as I'm talking to you, you wouldn't be able to understand me talking to you. That's not how it works, in other words. So in that case, Dongshan says, then I can't hear you teaching the Dhamma. So Dongshan saying something like, oh, I have gone beyond the subjective. And Yunnan says, no, if you don't hear me teaching the Dhamma right now, then how much more could you not hear the inconceivable? In other words, if you cannot see the Buddha nature in the subjective, fully imbuing the subjective as a demonstration of Buddha nature, then you certainly cannot see Buddha nature itself, the absolute or the principles of Buddha nature, in other words. All right, so that's that about the insentient preaching the Dhamma. So then I want to go back to this, page 195. Guishan. So before he was with Yunnan, Dongshan was with Guishan, and Guishan said, I have it too, but I have had no chance to meet an awakened person. So again, he's doing this interplay, right? I have Buddha nature too, and I haven't met an awakened person, meaning not that he's never met somebody who's enlightened, because I doubt that that's what he would be saying. What he's saying is that this subjective self isn't changed in any way by the realization. There's no special person. There's no special type of person. So the master said, I still don't get it. I'm not understanding what you're saying, right? Because realization seems like something special. And like he's heard the stories of Guishan's teacher being enlightened and Guishan being enlightened and so on. So Dongshan, as usual, showing his courage by showing his lack of understanding, just being honest about his experience and his curiosity, but also his being somewhat flummoxed by the thing. So Guishan raised his hosu, his whisk, ceremonial whisk, and asked, "Do you understand?" So this is a whisk. I have mine here with me, so you can have a look here. This is a whisk. It is, hold it the proper way. So the proper way to hold it would be like about so. And we hold it like so. And it's made of horse. This one is made of horsehair. They're not all made of horsehair because the horsehair ones are kind of heavy, but you can see that it is actual hair on a stick, basically. And from a practical standpoint, it actually was a whisk, like a fly whisk. So like, you could bat away whatever cicadas or whatever nasty bugs were hanging around you. It had that literal use, but it comes to symbolize authority, and particularly the authority of a Dharma transmitted Zen teacher. So it comes to be a symbol of power and a teaching tool for those who have received Dharma transmission. And so this is the kind of whisk. So Guishan would have held up his whisk in front of Dongshan. Do you see? Do you understand? Do you understand? And Dongshan didn't get it. So what's the meaning of this holding up of the whisk? Well, we see that Yunyan does it again with him. And he still didn't get it. So Guishan holds up the whisk and he says various things like, okay, you're not getting it, and so on. So the meaning of holding up the whisk is it's very similar to the Buddha holding up the flower. It's just an object that's at hand, but it's basically saying we use objects, and this particular object represents transmission in particular, right? Represents someone who has understood themselves as a Dhamma enough to become a teacher. Okay, that's one way to understand it. Understand transmission. So we use particular objects and hold them up, call them out as objects to which we can that we can point our attention to in an effort to realize the Dhamma. Literally, any object will do, but we experience particular ones as more helpful than others. Each individual has a particular one. The example that comes to mind, besides the flower of the Buddha and the whisk of Dongshan, is Venerable Terry Patachara. She was an awakened woman of the Buddha's time, and she tells of sitting down on her bed and turning out the lamp, and that being the moment in which she says she broke open the mass of delusion. She had ultimate realization. So the lamp was her particular object of awakening. So Dongshan is trying to show that both the particular and the universal are expressed right here, right now, in this thing that would have been right here at hand for him. So Yunyan also raised his hosu, his whisk, and Dongshan still didn't get it. So there's much to go on here. We could talk more about it, but what I want to say is Dongshan is leaving Yunyan. He's basically fed up. He's kind of giving up. But he asks him, what should I tell somebody? What should I tell somebody if after you die, they ask me, what was your teaching? Meaning, I still haven't quite understood your teaching, so lay it on me briefly. Or maybe something like, I don't want to leave without really understanding what you're trying to teach me, so please tell me one more time. And Yunyan gives a long pause and he says, just this is it, is how it's translated by Taigen Dan Layton. Cleary gives an even, or rather Cook, as usual, gives a very literal translation. Just this. Tada kore kore is how it's said in Japanese. Tada is this, is just, and kore is this, and this. Tada kore kore. Just this is it. Just this. And Dongshan goes away despairing because he still doesn't understand. So you could understand this teaching, just this is it, just this, to mean there's nothing beyond what we're experiencing right now. Don't look for anything else. That would, in fact, be a very despairing teaching, I would think. Because it says that this experience of being mired in delusion and dukkha is all there is. And that's not the teaching of Buddhism. I don't think that that's what Yunyan meant. But then we see that Dongshan actually does understand what Yunyan meant by just this is it. Because what he's pointing at is what has been pointed at throughout the centuries in Buddhism. That this very lived experience is fully enough for you to understand the true nature of all things. It is that thing you are looking for is you, is right here. So what happens? Dongshan goes and he sees his reflection in the mirror, in the stream, the river. He sees his reflection in the river as he's crossing the stream. And he's greatly awakened. So what is it that happens there? What is it that happens for Dongshan? Well, something like he sees his image in the water. So the water is the Buddha nature, and his image is this momentary phenomena, this fleeting there but not their experience. Do you see? So he understands, and it's completely non-separate, this reflection that he's seeing in the water is completely non-separate from the water. It's just water. So he gives us this beautiful poem to go by. And again, I'm going to change from the Cook here to the Cleary translation, because I believe that in this case, Cleary's translation is much more beautiful of the Dongshan poem. And actually we'll look also at Taigen Dan Layton's. I gave you that as a supplemental reading here. Don't seek from others. Categorically, do not look for the Dhamma outside of yourself. It's not that it's not there. It's there. It's equally demonstrated there, here, with them, with you. It's that if you think that there is something that you're going to receive that will make you special or make you complete or make it possible for you to experience, to realize the truth of your life, that's not true. Don't seek from others or you will be estranged from yourself. That's how he felt up until that point of seeing his reflection in the stream. I now go on alone. I now go on alone. Everywhere I encounter it. Everywhere I encounter it, the inconceivable, the insentient, that thing that he had been so obsessed with. It is now me, but I am not it. And you could say and. There's no preface. There's no word in the middle here. It is now me. I am not it. So what does that mean? It means, again, this life is the full expression of it, and I am not it. I am not the full expression of it. I am just a phenomena within it, within the true nature of all reality. One must understand in this way to merge with being as is. One must understand in this way to merge with being as is. To merge, to experience the non-separation, to eliminate that sense of a gap, of something missing. So if we look at Taigen Dan Layton's book, Just This Is It, is an excellent book. Mind you, I haven't read the whole thing, but parts that I have read have been really beautiful. Taigen, I have a deep respect for him as a scholar, as somebody who has done decades and decades of practice and also study of Dogen and of Dongshan and Soto Zen teachings. He says, his version of the poem is this: just don't seek from others or you'll be far estranged from self. I now go on alone. Everywhere I meet it. It now is me. I now am not it. And you know, this line, everywhere I meet it, is also beautiful, right? Because it's the meeting, it's meeting the truth of your life, moment after moment after moment, everywhere, no matter where you are. It is me, I am not it. One must understand in this way to merge with suchness. To merge with suchness. That is, succinctly put, the endeavor of Soto Zen, to merge with the suchness of all things, of one's life and of all things. So on page 148, just talking about Keizan's comments on this, on Dongshan's life and awakening, he says toward the bottom of the Cleary translation on 148, in all present activities, he's quoting the teacher, which teacher? Dongshan. In all present activities, as long as the twin currents of profane and holy do not arise and disappear, then mystic consciousness, and I don't like this word mystic, okay, but we could say non-personal consciousness that is not in the realm of being or non-being, yet is fully perceptive and aware. So let me say that again. As long as the twin currents of profane and holy, this idea of dividing up the world into that which is sacred or absolute and that which is subjective, profane, not sacred. If those currents of dividing don't arise and cease, when all of that way of dividing your experience stops, when you go beyond that discernment, discrimination, this is the consciousness that is not in the realm of being or non-being, and yet is fully perceptive and aware. This is the awareness that can know Nibbana, that can know the inconceivable, and yet it's not your personal awareness. So that's why he goes on at the top of 149 to say people usually think that the inanimate or the non-sentient, as is sometimes also translated in the Cook, for example, people usually think that that word means things like walls and lamps and pillars, right? Just as I was saying, but that's not what he means. And then finally going down to 149. If you try to grasp this, you cannot get it. Why? Because it doesn't have a form, right? In Zen, we always say the nature of things is formlessness. What does formlessness mean? It means changing, shifting, transformed constantly, fleeting, always in process. So it is not existent. However, if you try to get rid of it, you cannot separate from it. It is forever with you. Therefore, it is not non-existent. So there is this which can be known. But it is not a thing or a place or an essence or a being. This is the other thing that we have to be very careful with, I have to say, in Zen teaching, is that sometimes it can start to sound like a kind of essentialism, or like even to the extent of something that is eternal, something that is like a soul, or people will say things like you merge with oneness, and that begins to sound very much like Hinduism, actually, not like Buddhism. So we have to be very, very careful how to talk about the nature of human life without positing something that is permanent and essential, because I would suggest that is a delusion. Anything permanent and essential, except for, again, change. The three marks of existence, the three marks are to be seen everywhere, at all times. And Nibbana, which stands outside of those three marks. So finally, the poem for Dongshan. Oh, before the poem, just want to say page 150 of the Cleary, that last paragraph before the poem. There is something that appears obvious and is clearly never hidden. Beautiful. So later, we might talk about Dogen's experience, which Keizan would have been familiar with. So he's echoing a teaching from Dogen when Dogen went to China and he had an encounter with the head cook called the Tenzo in Japanese. And the Tenzo told him that he asked the Tenzo, what is the meaning of words and letters? What is the meaning of the teachings? And the Tenzo told him, it is never hidden. So this verse, extremely subtle, mystic consciousness is not mental attachment. Phew, thank goodness we got that clear. All the time is causes that to teach profusely. I think there's a typo there. So let's see Cook's translation here of Keizan Zenji's poem. Extremely fine, subtle consciousness, that sounds a little bit more like it, is not emotional attachment. Check. It constantly makes that one, so Cook puts one with a capital O so that we're clear that who we're talking about, not a person. Preach keenly. Don't miss what is right here, right now.